Good evening, everyone. Uh, As he's mentioned, my name is Maudwella Kirkendall. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Community Advocates. I've been there for a very long time, 25 years. And again, I personally am, I'll talk a little bit about this, but I have a personal interest in this, and I'm excited about just the opportunity that we've had to work with the professor. I'm really excited about the book here. So um, I just want to give a special thank you to Boswell, our esteemed guest, Reggie Jackson, and then, of course, the renowned Professor Atuahene. Um, since 1976, Community Advocates has been around providing basic needs services for families within the city of Milwaukee, and now expanding outside of the city of Milwaukee to areas like Waukesha, Kenosha, and things of that nature. Um, Again, our main goal is to ensure that families and individuals live with basic needs, they live in dignity, they live with respect, and there's stability in the household. Every year we serve over 50,000 households, and it primarily working in four different areas, those being basic needs. Again, we talk about utility assistance, housing assistance. You, we also have behavioral health services. We have our Public Policy Institute, as well as our Milwaukee Women's Center division. And again, within those services, we do things like eviction prevention, foreclosure prevention, behavioral health services, mental health awareness, and some parenting support classes. In 2022, we were approached by the University of Wisconsin Law School and the Property Tax Justice Program to help homeowners avoid losing their homes due to unpaid property taxes. We knew immediately once we got some of the data that we should be involved with something like this. And then for me, again, as I mentioned, I personally had a stake in it. So some time ago, my dad was fortunate enough to buy a house in the Washington Heights area. And for those who know about that area, it's a really nice area. We were the only Black family in that area at the time when we purchased the home. And as time went on, my father got sick. He was not able to afford the property taxes. The house was completely paid for, and the city was about to take the property for $9,000. And so when you think about that, we've spent 15 years in this home. We made all these updates, and he was not able to pay the taxes, and the city would have essentially taken his home and resold his home to someone else for well over $150,000. And so for us, it was an opportunity for us to step in, and we weren't going to let the city do that. So I was able to purchase the home. But oftentimes people aren't in a position to do that. And so the city, county, oftentimes take these where they were taking these homes and making a profit off of them. And so when we were approached, I was really excited. And the team that we have, we were just excited about the opportunity. And then to be able to partner with UW Madison was just, for us, phenomenal. Again, and the data speaks volume. Between 2022 and 2023, the city filed over 330 foreclosures. And you think about that, if the average home is worth $100,000, we're talking 30 to 40 million dollars that the city was, essentially going to foreclose on for sometimes $3,000 to $5,000. And you think about that, I mean, taking home from individuals that have worked all their lives, paid their tax, and oftentimes these homes are paid in full. So we're essentially taking these properties and reselling them on the market. And so again, we were just excited about the opportunity to get involved. And in response, again, in 2023 of August, we kind of started a partnership with Milwaukee Property Tax Bill Project, and we were able to resolve $124,000 in tax debt. And while it doesn't seem like a lot, when you think about the potential that people are losing their properties for $5,000 or $8,000, it spoke volume. And again, we were able to keep these individuals in their homes. So we were, again, excited about the partnership. The other thing we were able to do, and I think it was very important for the professors, that we provide wraparound services for those families that were in need. So oftentimes it was simply they needed help finding a job, or they didn't understand there were resources out there to help them. Maybe I had to buy a furnace, so I couldn't afford to pay my property taxes. So we were able to link them with all these resources to keep them in their homes. And again, the project essentially addressed a critical gap that was not here in the city of Milwaukee, which was foreclosure prevention services and property tax appeal services. And again, there are agencies that do the work, but the need was so great. And we see all the time there's like 4 or 5 agencies that we can work with. But again, the need was so great that we had to step in and fill a gap. So I don't want to talk a long time. I've been rambling here. So additional information about our program you can find on our website, communityadvocates.net. I don't see Marissa here, but she is the person that's on the ground, literally knocking on doors and trying to assist families with stopping their foreclosure due to property taxes. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Professor Atuahene and our esteemed guest, Reggie Jackson.
Mm. Thank you so much, Madwala. The partnership with community advocates has been really just so impactful, so special. Um, yeah, it really has been wonderful. So thank you to everyone here from Community Advocates for all that you all do. What a amazing, amazing organization. So before getting to the book, I want to let you know a little bit about my background and how I came to the work. So my parents immigrated to America from Ghana in West Africa. And when I was a child, I knew I had four career options and four career options only. I could be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or a disgrace to the entire family. Oh. I was bad at math, so engineering was a no go. The thought of even dissecting cadavers makes me want to barf, so that was not an option. And since I was determined not to be a disgrace, so law was the only option left. But I didn't want to be just any old lawyer, y'all. Ever since I enrolled at UCLA for my undergraduate studies, I knew that I wanted to be a change maker protecting intergenerational wealth in my community. And when I commit to something, I am all in. So I worked myself to the bone and made it to Yale Law School and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government for my graduate studies. I eventually became a law professor, and now 100% of my research, writing, and advocacy deals with land stolen from Black people. So I do ethnography, which means I live and immerse myself in the place that I study. And my first ethnographic project actually studied land stolen in South Africa during apartheid and colonialism. So my first book, We Want What's Ours, Learning from South Africa's Land Restitution Program, really examined the psychological, social, economic, and political consequences of getting land or money back. The book was a huge success. At the official book launch, the Deputy Land Claims Commissioner himself attended and publicly announced that the commission planned to implement 90% of the book's recommendations. So the first book project, although it was wildly successful, it was really uncomfortable for me in many ways because it really looked at Black people as the victims, right? Black people being stolen from. So in my next ethnographic project, I wanted to switch. Instead of studying Black victimhood, I wanted to study Black agency. And so I decided to study squatting, which is where vulnerable populations are doing the stealing instead of being stolen from. And Detroit has one of the largest modern day squatting phenomenons in America. So that's how I actually got to Detroit. I won a big National Science Foundation grant to study squatting in Detroit. And a squatter is someone who occupies a property without the permission of the record owner. And there are two types of squatters in the law, what I call takeovers and then holdovers. A takeover is what normal people think of as a squatter, someone who rolls onto a piece of property with no permission. But then I'm a property, I teach property to first year law students. And so in my property class, I teach my students about a category called holdovers. And those are people who once had a legal relationship but fell out of it, right? So they were once, tenants and fell out of it. But in my case, I had to interview both takeovers and holdovers. And when I interviewed the holdovers, one after the other said they were the owner and they got tax foreclosed and they stayed waiting for the new owners to appear. And I was like, tax foreclosure. At that point, I had known quite a bit about mortgage foreclosure, right? But I knew very little about tax foreclosure. So I had to really start doing my homework. And I soon discovered that since 2009, the local government has confiscated 1 in 3 Detroit homes for failure to pay their property taxes. 1 in 3. We haven't seen this number of property tax foreclosures in American history since the Great Depression. And given the gravity of the situation, I really had to switch my research focus from squatting to property tax foreclosure because when you do ethnography, this is not some theoretical exercise. My neighbors were losing their homes. And I have lived on Detroit's east side since 2017 to really try and understand the property tax foreclosure crisis from the perspective of those I live beside. So Myrisha Brown is one of more than 150 homeowners who I have interviewed for my study. Myrisha is this petite brown skinned woman with a super cute pixie cut. Hers is one of the many stories I tell in my book, Plundered: How Racist Policies Undermine Black Homeownership in America. So, one cold winter day, Myrisha and I returned to the family home on Bayless Street that she had lost to property tax foreclosure. As we walked to the house, Myrisha said, "Man, I have not been back here since my kids and I were evicted several years back." As soon as we stepped into the yard, we both noticed that the home was vacant. And for Myrisha, that was a total and complete gut punch because she had worked so hard to ensure that her home did not become a vacant, blighted structure like many of the other homes on her block and in the city of Detroit. As we slowly walked around the perimeter of the property, she pointed to the many places she had told me about in the multiple interviews we completed throughout the years. She said, "This is a spot where our garage used to be. A fire that started next door burnt it to the ground. This is a spot where my grandfather's beloved apple tree used to be. After he died, it died and it eventually got cut down." As we moved from the backyard to the side of the home, she stopped and peered through the side window to get a better look at the living room where her grandmother, who lived to age 102, spent her last days. When I saw Myrisha's face turn ashen, I immediately ran over to her side to figure out what in the world was going on. We both could not believe our eyes. The pipes in the home had frozen and burst, covering the living room in at least a foot of ice. Myrisha wailed, and all I could do in that moment is just stand there and hold her and cry with her. This home on Baylor Street meant so much to Myrisha because her grandparents fought hell and high water to acquire it. Despite racial covenants, redlining, blockbusting, urban renewal, and other racist policies, in their retirement, Myrisha's grandparents were finally able to purchase the home. And it was without a doubt their dream home. It was actually in an area that racial covenants made off limits to blacks at one time, but when whites moved to the suburbs, blacks started moving into that area. So the home on Baylor Street was the only asset that Myrisha's grandparents had to pass down. But by the time her grandmother passed away, no other family member even wanted the home because it was no longer a valuable asset. In fact, it had become a money pit. The home had broken windows covered with plastic to keep the elements out. There was no functioning bath or shower. The plaster was falling from the ceiling. And the other homes on the block were in equally bad shape. But what I need you to realize is when historic and modern day redlining cut off funds for home improvement, this type of blight is inevitable. Given the poor shape of the Bayless home, the question is, why in the world was Myrisha so eager to inherit her grandparents' home and so committed to rehabilitating it when no other person in her family wanted anything to do with it? When I interviewed Myrisha for the first time, she shared her life with me and gave me some insight into this quandary. As the oldest child and a woman, I'm going to talk about gender now, she carried back-breaking caretaking responsibilities on her very narrow shoulders. Myrisha told me that not only did she care for her two children, she also cared for their father, who was in a wheelchair as a result of a carjacking. She told me that she had to care for her sister, who had a debilitating autoimmune disease, along with her sister's child. Myrisha also had to care for another sister who had irreversible brain damage and that sister's young son. Because of our nation's poorest social safety net, women like Myrisha are forced to fill the gaps at great cost to themselves. After spending time with Myrisha, it became clear to me why she couldn't easily give up on her legacy, give up on her grandparents' home. Under no circumstances does Myrisha dodge or evade her family responsibilities. No matter how daunting, she takes them on head on. Rehabilitating her grandparents' legacy was not something that Myrisha wanted to do, it's something she had to do. Some of Myrisha's most precious childhood memories happened on Bayless Street. She said to me, "I remember scooping up the apples my grandfather shook down from the apple tree. Those were some of the juiciest green apples in the entire city of Detroit." Above all, Myrisha is a proud ride to die Detroiter who's committed to her city. And she just did not want her home to become a vacant eyesore like so many of the other homes in the city, contributing to the story of Detroit's demise rather than its revival. That's why the day we returned to the home on the Bayless Street and she saw the living room filled with ice, she felt like a complete and utter failure. But what I need you to understand is that Myrisha failed because individual efforts are no match for broken systems. Let me say that again. Myrisha failed because individual efforts are no match for broken systems. The saga started when Myrisha found a yellow bag attached to her porch. Looks just like you want to hold it up, the yellow bag depicted on the book cover here. Thank you. Got Vanna White in the front row here. Thank you, darling. All right. When she opened the bag, she found a legal notice informing her that the property tax foreclosure process had begun, and if she didn't pay her debt by March 31st of the following year, Wayne County would sell the home in its tax foreclosure auction. After she read the notice, she was filled with emotion. She felt scared, she felt anxious, she felt depressed, and most of all, y'all, she felt shame. She was ashamed because the yellow bag announced to the entire neighborhood that she was behind in her property taxes and about to lose her grandparents' home. But when she looked up, surprisingly, almost every home on the block had a yellow bag attached to the porch. So she knew something was wrong, but she didn't know exactly what was going on. When I first interviewed Myrisha, she blamed herself for losing her legacy. She said, "Well, Professor, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing." Most city officials that I interviewed also explained the property tax foreclosure crisis with what I call stories of personal irresponsibility. One told me, "Well, the problem, Professor, is Detroiters just don't want to pay their taxes." Another told me, "Well, Professor, the problem is that people bought homes they couldn't afford." And one city official, Dave Szymanski, let's say his name out loud, the former treasurer of Detroit, said, "Well, Professor, the problem is instead of paying their taxes, they decided to buy purses." And not only did he tell me that, but he said that when he was on the dais amongst thousands of people about to lose their homes. This is what he told the people about to lose their homes as well. So, although these stories of personal irresponsibility are internalized by the people losing their home, and they are the stories that are the dominant narrative being told by the city officials, my research tells a different story. It's not a story of personal irresponsibility, it's a story of structural injustice. In researching this book, I have interviewed hundreds of homeowners, government officials, and investors. I've combed through reams and reams of property tax assessment data. I even took a 9-month course to become a certified Michigan assessor and passed a state exam. So I am literally a Michigan property tax assessor. My comprehensive investigation shows that between 2009 and 2015, in each of these 7 years, anywhere between 53 and 84% of homes were taxed in violation of the Michigan state constitution, which quite clearly says no property can be assessed at more than 50% of its market value. The lowest valued homes, like the Bayless home, were most severely affected. In addition to my work, the Detroit News did an expose, and they found that the city of Detroit overtaxed its homeowners by at least $600 million. Since over 30% of Detroiters live below the poverty line, many homeowners didn't have the money to pay these illegally inflated property taxes. And what's worse, many of these homeowners, lost their homes for property taxes they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place. Why? Because in Michigan, when you live below the poverty line, you qualify for a poverty tax exemption. But the city of Detroit made this entitlement so difficult to acquire that many people lost their homes again for property taxes they were not supposed to be paying in the first place. So it's no wonder that when Myrisha looked up, she saw yellow bags affixed to almost every home on her block. My God, my God. When the local government takes a family's home for failure to pay property taxes, it doesn't just take bricks and mortar. It takes intergenerational wealth. It takes priceless memories. Through the evictions, people lose precious family photos. They lose grandmama's quilts. They can't cover the height marks etched into door frames marking a child's growth. They're separated from longtime neighbors who've become like family. Through property tax foreclosure, I want you all to understand that people lose so much. Because most of the tax foreclosed homes had been inherited, they were fully paid off. So just like Madwala's dad's house. And so people blame themselves for losing mama's house or losing granddaddy's house. Because if there was a mortgage on the house, the bank would have taken it before the local government could. So during the interviews that I conducted of tax foreclosed homeowners, there was so much shame and self lambasting that sometimes when the interview was over, I would call people back and I said, you know what, sis? You know what, my brother? There is no reason to feel shame. Systemic injustice was hidden in the complex property tax calculations. Racist policies put you in a position of trying to slay a dragon with a butter knife. According to my dear brother, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, racist policies are written and unwritten laws and processes that produce and sustain racial inequity. The way that property taxes are calculated in Wayne County undoubtedly qualifies. Wayne County has 43 cities, 33 of which have a supermajority of white people, 70% or more, and 3 that have a supermajority of Black people, Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park. And so I did a study that shows that the majority Black cities are subjected to unconstitutional property tax assessments and foreclosures at a far greater rate than the majority white cities. This is racial injustice. But this injustice is not at all exclusively a Detroit problem. Detroit is, in fact, ground zero for a national problem. The most recent national study on this topic shows that Blacks and Hispanics, on average, pay a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate than whites for the same bundle of goods, which equals $300 to $400 more per year. So, racialized property tax administration is a nationwide problem that our country has not yet even begun to address. And most importantly, this is a quintessential example of what in my book I call predatory governance, which is when local governments intentionally or unintentionally raise public dollars through racist policies. We've seen predatory governance in Ferguson, Missouri. Beyond what happened to our dear brother Michael Brown, there was an excellent DOJ report documenting how the unconstitutional policing in Ferguson that was unfairly subjecting African Americans to excessive fees and fines. Who benefited financially? Not some corrupt police officer, but the city of Ferguson itself. Predatory governance is what's happening in Detroit and many other cities where the local governments are inflating the property taxes of Black and brown homeowners. Who's financially benefiting? Not some corrupt public official, but instead the public coffers. So that was depressing. But the part that gives me light and gives me hope and fills me with joy is just as Detroit is ground zero for the national problem, Detroit is also the epicenter of the resistance. And once my research exposed the hidden structural problems, this information lifted the shame, allowed homeowners to stop beating themselves up, and made room for righteous indignation so that the fight back could begin. In 2017, my students and I joined with over 12 grassroots community organizations in Detroit to create something called the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. And we have 3 goals and 3 goals only. Number 1 is to stop these illegally inflated property taxes in Detroit and throughout America. Number 2 is to stop the ongoing foreclosures of owner-occupied homes until we can make sure that people are being foreclosed on for what they actually owe instead of illegally inflated property taxes. And the third is to provide compensation. So by building community power, we have successfully secured many wins. We have halted roughly 13,000 tax foreclosures by pressuring the Wayne County Treasurer to put a moratorium on owner-occupied homes in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. We have helped over 1,000 Detroit homeowners successfully apply for a total of $4.4 million in federal ARPA funding to pay their illegally inflated property tax debt. We've appealed the inflated property tax assessments for over 1,000 Detroit homeowners free of charge. And most importantly, we've secured $6 million from the city of Detroit for compensation. Most importantly, through the Dignity Restoration Project, we're raising $10 million to compensate Detroiters like Myrisha who lost their homes due to illegally inflated property taxes that they were not supposed to be paying in the first place because they qualified for that poverty tax exemption that I'm talking about. You all can go to the dignityrestorationproject.org to donate. Again, dignityrestorationproject.org to donate. Your contribution sends a message saying, I see you and I affirm your dignity to Myrisha and the 30,000 other people who the local government unfairly took their homes for property taxes they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place. To conclude, I'm glad I didn't become an engineer. I'm glad that I didn't become a doctor. I'm glad that I became a lawyer fighting against the theft of Black homes, fighting to protect our intergenerational wealth and our dignity. Both of my parents have gone on to glory, but I know they're smiling down on me because I've managed not to disgrace them. But more importantly and more seriously, people in Detroit and throughout the country who are filled with shame because they're fighting a losing battle against racist policies, they are not a disgrace either. So let me stop there. And my dear brother Reggie and I will have our conversation.
Thank you, Professor. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. Glad the weather warmed up a little bit today. Man, I've been staying in the house because I'm from Mississippi and I don't like Wisconsin weather. Never have, never will. But speaking of Wisconsin, as I was talking to the professor earlier today, I told her I have a nickname for Wisconsin. Anybody in the room know what my nickname for Wisconsin is? You probably know, Deshaun. I call Wisconsin Mississippi. Mississippi. And, you know, people talk about, oh, Wisconsin's a blue state. Wisconsin's a red state. We may as well be in Mississippi from my perspective. Listen, I moved from Mississippi to Milwaukee in 1973 from a little town where the schools had been integrated a couple years before I started school. And I had white and Black classmates in Mississippi in second grade. When I left Mississippi, moved to Milwaukee from third through eighth grade, I had nothing but Black classmates in Milwaukee. First time I had white classmates in Milwaukee was when I caught the city bus all the way to the south side and went to Milwaukee Trade and Technical High School. First time I had white classmates in Milwaukee. So I went from Jim Crow at the south to Jim Crow at the north, literally. And that has really influenced the way I see the city that we live in. And so about 10 years ago, I started being interviewed about the history of segregation in Milwaukee. And Milwaukee Magazine asked me to write an article about it. I researched and wrote an article, sent it to them. They said they loved it. They never published it. Really, really made me mad. But I learned a lesson. Nobody's going to get me to write for them for free anymore. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to take what I've learned. I'm going to put together a presentation I call The Hidden Impact of Segregation. I started doing that presentation around Milwaukee and, you know, libraries, churches, businesses. And I've done some version of that presentation probably close to 300 times now. When I got to 200, I stopped counting, but I know I've done it close to 100 times since then. And it's been very well received. Thank you. It's been one of the greatest joys of my life because I love history and I love local history more than anything else because I learned nothing about Milwaukee's history when I was in school, you know, all those years. And I look back and I'm thinking like, why didn't they teach me anything about the history of segregation in Milwaukee? Because it really impacted Black people in a terrible way. And so I decided a few years ago, thanking my wife Venus for allowing me the time to go in that basement, into my little office in the basement and get on the computer and write and research, you know, all hours of the night. And I'm constantly buying books. I think I have just about every book that's been written about housing issues. And Venus is constantly telling me, Reggie, stop buying books. Start buying some bookshelves. We don't have any space for all your books. And so I decided I'm going to write this book. I'm going to be the first person to write a book about the history of segregation in Milwaukee because Milwaukee is the poster child for segregation, right? My book, I'm going to tell you the title of my book. I'm hoping to finish it this summer, but there's no guarantee. I mean, it's really hard to write a book, and I've been working on it tirelessly. and I'm making good progress, but I still have a long way to go. The title of my book is called Midwest Nice: Apartheid, The History and Harms of Segregation in Milwaukee. Midwest Nice: Apartheid. Why do I call it Midwest Nice Apartheid? Because I'm tired of white people telling me about Midwest Nice. Midwest isn't so nice to black folks. Maybe it's Midwest nice to white people, but it's not nice to black folks. When black people started coming to Milwaukee in larger numbers in the early 1900s, white people started writing racial covenants immediately. And so I've been working with two organizations over the last couple of years. One is called Mapping Prejudice. It's a group at the University of Minnesota who has been attempting to map every racial certificate covenant in Hennepin County, Minnesota. They completed that project. They've reached out and helping other communities do the same. There's a group here in Milwaukee at UW Milwaukee. Professor Ann Bonds, Professor Derek Hanley started a project called Mapping Racism and Resistance to map all of the racial covenants in Milwaukee County. And they are almost done. They're about 90% complete. And they have found in Milwaukee County, and these are written between 1910 and 1960, 26,500 racial restrictive covenants within Milwaukee County. And surprisingly, most of them are not in the suburbs. There's a bunch in the suburbs. Most of them are in the city of Milwaukee. So they started writing them in the 1920s to the 1930s when most of them were written. But guess what? Guess what the black population of Milwaukee was in 1920? Anybody know? I know nobody knows. I'm going to tell you. 2,229 black people lived in the city of Milwaukee in 1920, but white people were writing racial covenants like it was going out of style. By 1930, that black population had grown to 7,501, and they continued to write these racial covenants. In 1948, the Supreme Court, in a case called Shelley v. Kramer, said that these racial restrictive covenants are no longer legally enforceable, which means the court cannot come and remove families from those homes. But guess what? People here kept writing those racial covenants anyway. They didn't care what the Supreme Court said. They just continued to do it. And many of these racial covenants lasted many years into the future. The most extreme one I've seen was actually written in South Milwaukee in 1937. It was set to expire January 1st, 2024. And so I was at an event, and the mayor of South Milwaukee was there, Eric Brooks, really nice guy. He said, Reggie, what can we do about that racial covenant? I said, Mr. Mayor, you can't do anything about it. The damage has been done already. I said, use that as a teachable moment to show people why South Milwaukee is so darn white. Don't try to get rid of the covenant. You can't do that. The damage has been done. But he stayed on me every time he saw me for the next 2 years. Reggie, what can we do about the covenant? I said, Mr. Mayor, use it as a teachable moment. Tell people in the community what happened so they know why they don't have black neighbors. And so I just had a conversation with his daughter last week. She's writing a paper for her school on the history of segregation in Milwaukee. And so it's kind of taken me to weird places. But as I had a conversation with the professor earlier today, you know, we talked about a lot of different things. But one of the things—
And all of this, just to everything, this is so beautifully told in such a succinct moment. Again, the book is not just a story of Detroit. It's a story of all Black communities in America. You know, we talked about earlier, when I say racist, you know, the book title is Plundered: How Racist Policies Undermine Black Homeownership in America. What do we mean by racist policies, right? And that's exactly what we mean. So the way I talk about this in the book, again, I use the lives of two grandfathers, Grandpa Bucci, who was a sharecropper in Italy, and then we have Grandpa Brown, who was a sharecropper from North Carolina. The great thing about the story is both of them come to Detroit around the same time, 1902, 1905, to start at the River Rouge factory, which was one of the dirtiest, most dangerous of Ford's factories. And what we're able to do is to map those two gentlemen's lives to figure out what happened, right? They were both sharecroppers in their country of origin. The only difference was their skin color. And so what happened? And so the book tells you the story about Grandpa Bucci. He didn't have an easy life. You know, before he made it to Detroit, he was working at a coal mine in France. He literally only had 4 fingers because he lost a finger in a workplace accident. So in no way did Grandpa Bucci have an easy life, but Grandpa Bucci never had to deal with racial covenants restricting where he could live in Detroit, restricting not allowing him to move to the suburbs where the houses were cheaper, larger, with better amenities. Grandpa Bucci never had it easy, but he never had the federal government draw a red line around his community saying that this community is a credit risk and ensuring that the community was disinvested, making his people the presence of black people because of redlining could reduce property values. So although Grandpa Bucci had it hard, he never had to deal with racial covenants. He never had to deal with redlining. He never had to deal with the block busting. These are the racist policies I'm talking about. Block busting is because of redlining. Literally, the presence of black people could reduce your market value. And so these real estate intermediaries would say, the blacks are coming, the blacks are coming. Then whites would move. Anytime you move quickly, you don't get the full market value. And then they would resell those same homes at an inflated price to black homeowners. So within the space of a short amount of time, communities would flip from majority white to majority black. Again, although Grandpa Bucci had it hard, he did not have an easy life. He never had to deal with block busting, racial covenants, redlining. And instead of telling you these things in the book, I show you. And what is the end goal? What was the end result? Well, Grandpa Bucci's grandson, Robert Ficano, now lives in his grandfather's house. I asked Robert, why do you live in the house? He said, well, I don't have to pay a note. Of course I live in my grandfather's house. And the house is worth over $250,000 in Detroit suburbs. Myrisha, Grandpa Brown's granddaughter, also inherited his house, the dream home I talked about. But when she inherited his house, that house was worth less than $10,000. It wasn't an asset, it was a money pit. Why? Because of historic and modern day redlining, disinvesting from the community, not allowing home loan repair loans to do the maintenance. Then of course what she inherited was a money pit. And so it really shows the reader how racist policies really made the difference between these two gentlemen's lives. And it was only thing the real difference between the two of them is the color of the skin. But the narratives we say today, it's Grandpa Bucci and his progeny have what they have because they worked hard. But guess what? Grandpa Brown worked hard too. All right? Grandpa Brown worked hard too. And the thing is, when we look at these communities where why is there so much crime and disorder, right? What the blame goes on the people in the communities, because what remains invisible are the racist policies, the invisible policies that are doing all of this work. That's invisible. So who gets the blame is the people. And then these narratives of personal irresponsibility. Well, the community's like it is because you have children out of wedlock. You commit too much crime. You XYZ, all of these stories of personal irresponsibility. But what then doesn't get talked about are these invisible structures, these racist policies that are really doing the work in terms of creating these racial differentials.
And one of the other things we talked about is the flip side of that coin. Why do white people have it so good? They've been told, well, the good old Protestant work ethic, forgetting that they enslaved black people in this country for 246 years. I don't know what that says about your work ethic when you bring people literally across the Atlantic Ocean to work for free so you can sit and drink mint juleps all day. But what white people don't understand, because nobody teaches them this in school, is that they've gotten the hookup from the federal government, from banks.
Did he really say mint juleps, y'all?
Yeah. I'm from Mississippi. I heard of mint juleps. I've never tasted one, but I've heard of them. So white people think they have what they have because they do all of the right things, as if black people do all the wrong things. White people, understand you have what you have because you've gotten what I call the hookup. Federal government built the suburbs to be all white. They subsidized the building of those homes. They made it cheap for the builders to build the homes. They built the freeway to get you out to the darn suburbs, for goodness sake. And at the same time, they were using urban renewal policies in cities like Milwaukee, Detroit, Chicago, pick any city, to tear down black business districts. Walnut Street Business District in Milwaukee was a thriving business district in 1950. Half of black-owned businesses in the city were on Walnut Street. And everybody will tell you, oh, it was the freeway that destroyed Walnut Street. No, it wasn't. Stop telling that lie. It wasn't the freeway. It was urban renewal. The Hillside Urban Renewal Project wiped out half of the black businesses in Milwaukee. Everything from 3rd to 10th Street was torn down. And guess what? All those black people that lost homes and businesses that were displaced, the city actually admitted in a report that I read that I'm sure nobody else has read, a report that they wrote in 1967 that said, we know these people displaced by urban renewal are going to have a difficult time finding a place to live if they're black, but if they're white, they'll be able to find some place to live very easily. They literally admitted this in this report that literally, I'm sure nobody other than me has read since 1967. So once
And I
again, the
could
white
tell
people
that
got the hookup.
exact story. So this urban renewal story, this is a story we can tell in all Black communities throughout America. This exact story in Detroit, the community wasn't called Bronzeville, it was called Black Bottom, right? And so through Black Bottom, same thing, urban renewal comes. And what I need you to understand about urban renewal is two things. Number one, what urban renewal was trying to do is erase blight. But there was no acknowledgement that it was the federal government's redlining that created that blight in the first place, the blight that they were coming to raise. And the second thing you need to realize is alongside of blighted structures were unblighted structures, were Black businesses, Black cultural institutions. All of it, the good with the bad, is erased. And because of the segregated housing market, there were only a few places, like this report said, right, Reggie, that Black people could then go once being removed through urban renewal. There's a few communities they could go to. And now these communities are now communities of strangers. Before, you had a community where people knew each other. You could regulate social behavior through gossip and social discipline because there was a thick social network, lots of social capital. But because of urban renewal, where you displace a massive number of people, you are literally creating communities of strangers. And when you have a community of strangers, these communities are vulnerable to crime and poverty, etc. Right? But Mindy Fullilove, who is a psychiatrist at Columbia Law School, has a concept she calls root shock, to really describe what happens through these mass removal processes like urban renewal and the freeway programs, right? When a person loses their emotional ecosystem, loses everything, she talks about the psychological and emotional scars that produced, and that trauma resonates, she argues, intergenerationally. And so these are the things we have to talk about, right? And again, urban renewal is another example of what I call a racist policy. And again, the definition of a racist policy is any policy or process or procedure that produces racial inequity. It's just that simple.
Whether intentional or not intentional.
That's right.
That's the
exactly
thing about it. People think, well, that wasn't done intentionally, Reggie. I was about to curse. I'm sorry. I was about to curse. I usually don't curse, but I've been cursing a lot over the last couple of months. You can imagine why, right? But anyway, let's
stick with the mint juleps.
It's not true because you can't see these same things happen in Detroit, Chicago, New York, New Orleans, Charleston, South Carolina, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Seattle, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, all these different cities. The exact same things happen just by accident? No, it's on purpose. There's a great deal of purpose behind it. Part of it is designed to harm Black people, and the other side is to help Black people or help white people. Give white people a hookup. Invisibly give them the hookup because they're not aware of these policies and practices that are done behind their backs, but they sure are happy about them. And then when Black people try to move to the suburbs, I met the former mayor of New Berlin. In 2010, they tried to build an apartment building called workers' housing in New Berlin. And it wasn't for low-income people. It was for people that lived in New Berlin but couldn't afford who worked in New Berlin but couldn't afford to live there. And they wanted to provide housing for those people. And the community lost their minds. People started chasing the mayor around town. He was in a grocery store, and he said, a man came up to him and said, "You're lowering my property value." He's like, "No, I'm not." And he said before he knew it, it was a crowd of people surrounding him. He said it was like a lynch mob. And they held him in the grocery store for over an hour. He couldn't escape. Finally, the manager came over and told him, "You got to leave. You're causing commotion." He said, "Me? What about all of these people?" And so as this man was sharing these stories with me, I'm like, man, what happened? He said they shot up his car. They painted the N-word on the back of his house. They scratched the N-word in the side of his mayor vehicle. They did all kinds of stuff, terrified this man, but he stuck with it for a while, and then he gave up, and he said, okay, we're going to cancel the apartment. The developer sued the city of New Berlin and the mayor, and they built the apartment complex. It's one of the most beautiful things in New Berlin right now. It's in the center of the city. They built a ice skating rink across the street from it. They built a farmer's market across the street. None of the things that they thought would happen happened. It's been a beautiful addition, but that shows you what happened when white people make assumptions about what happens when people that they think are going to come to the community. And they said to the mayor, numerous times people said, we're not going to allow New Berlin to become another Milwaukee or West Allis. I apologize to people from West Allis, but that's what they literally told the mayor. We're not going to let this become another Milwaukee or West Allis. And so, this is the things that people do, and we're not aware of it because nobody reports it on the news. When you turn on the news, I was telling my wife last night, I hate watching the news. Every time I turn on, and I don't care what local channel you pick, Channel 4, 6, 58, 12, they're guaranteed to show you something negative about black people every single night. And so you're watching this, you're like thinking, man, black people have lost their minds. They must be crazy. They just shot a 4-year-old girl. They didn't give you any details of what happened with this 4-year-old girl getting killed. But you watching and you're like, man, no wonder white people want to stay away from black people.
Yeah.
They've been tricked into believing that we're animals.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the moves of the book is to really, one of my goals is to really change the way we talk about race in America, right? Right now, our conversations about race are very much focused on intent, right? Hollywood has taught us we're looking, black hats, white hats, good guys, bad guys. We're all looking for the racist. That is the way we talk about race in America. And it's not just, Hollywood, it's our equal protection jurisprudence, right? After a case called Washington v. Davis, in order to have a equal protection violation, you need to prove intent. We are obsessed with intent, right? From our constitutional jurisprudence all the way down to Hollywood. We're obsessed with intent. And the move I'm trying to make in the book is telling us, let's step away from intent for a second, guys. Let's step away from intent and then just look at, excuse me. So if I sock Reggie in the face, I would never do that, my brother. Okay. If I sock Reggie in the face, should we talk about, did she mean to do it? Or should we get this brother some stitches and fix his face up? Or should we be obsessed with what I meant to do when I hit him in the face? Let's just focus on the fact that his face is busted up and he needs some help. That's where our racial conversation needs to go. That's why when I talk about racist policies, again, it's not to say that there is or is not. The intent is, it's just focusing on where if a policy is causing racial inequity, then we need to fix that policy. Without being worried about, you blame and intent. Let's just fix the racial inequity. And we have to move our conversation from these conversations up here about, this is why some people can say, we're in a post-racial America. When you have a conversation in these generalities, we need to bring the conversation to the specifics, right? Policy by policy. So that's one move. So we could talk, in the book, I don't talk about, or in my work, I don't talk about systemic racism. I don't talk about structural racism. I, on purpose, use the term racist policies. Why? Because when you talk about structural racism, what can you do about that? That's so big and right? What can you do about it? But when you talk about racist policies, that does two things. Number one, it forces a person who's making the claim to articulate the actual policies. Like, for instance, in the story I just told you about Detroit, the reason why we're having those racial inequities, right? The white communities getting taxed at a different rate than the black communities is because the lower valued homes are being overtaxed. It's because there's an 18% interest penalty mandated by Michigan legislature, right? I can go into each and every specific policy that's leading to this specific racial inequity. And so that's why I think we need to switch our language from structural racism to racist policies, because it forces, again, number one, the person articulating to enumerate the policies. So then now that those policies have been enumerated, guess what? We can disassemble them. Okay? We can disassemble them. But when we keep the conversation at this broad level of structural racism, it's a non-starter. We can't talk about anything specific, and then people can talk about silly things like racism doesn't exist. No, we got to bring it to the specifics. What's the inequity? What are the policies behind that inequity? And let's get to work. So that's one of another shift I'm trying to make is, again, from talking about structural racism, systemic racism, to talking about racist policies. And this, Ibram Kendi and I have gone back and forth a lot. He really has influenced my thinking. And so I have to give him credit every time for that. He's the one that helped me shift my thinking because I used to talk about structural racism, but I don't do that anymore.
Absolutely. I want to give you an example of policies in Milwaukee. So during COVID, Milwaukee paused doing property tax assessments, right? They skipped a year as cities around the country were doing. And so when they came back and they did the first property assessment after COVID ended, they released the data. And what I found was that the data didn't look right. Across the city of Milwaukee, property tax or property values went up an average of 17.7%. That was the city overall, right? But when I looked at it by aldermanic district, which is how they released the data, I found that all of the majority black aldermanic districts, it went up over 20%. And the highest was the 7th district, which is where Venus and I live. It went up over 32%. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not right. And then when I looked for the lowest percentage increase, they were all in the white sections of town, primarily on the southwest side of Milwaukee. So what I did, being the person I am, I said, this reminds me of something I've seen before. Let me make a map. So I made a map, and I intentionally made it look like a redlining map to show how disparate these property assessments were, for the black part of town versus the white part of town. And it was clear when you looked at the map. And there was only one alderperson who complained about, these differences. Bob Ballman. I got to give him credit. But I'm giving credit to the wrong person because he complained about it. He said, listen, these property tax increases are it's ridiculous. Now, he failed to mention that his district had one of the lowest increases, only 12%. And the woman that runs the assessor's office had the audacity to go to a black part of town and have a lecture with people and tell them that, listen, if your property tax, if the assessment didn't go up 13% or more, your property taxes will not increase at all. Not knowing or not thinking that where she was sitting was in the 7th district, where it went up 32% on average. So how are you telling these people that they're not going to be impacted when everybody in the room is going to be impacted as a homeowner? Obviously, she wasn't thinking. I'm glad I wasn't in that room because I would have checked immediately and probably would have got in trouble. Y'all may have seen me on Fox 6 News getting dragged out of the room or something.
Lord. We don't want that, Reggie. So let me just piggyback on that. And that's exactly, so the project with community advocates that Madwala was talking about, that's exactly what we do. It's a partnership between community advocates and the University of Wisconsin Law School clinic program. And so what that partnership does is exactly this. So one of the big problems about, you might be asking, why is it systemically? I told you that nationally, Blacks and Hispanics pay a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate than whites for the same bundle of goods, which equals $300 to $400 more per year, right? You might ask, how is that happening? Well, it's happening because property taxes are done through what we call mass appraisal. And so what you need to realize, first of all, let me start by explaining something that we call the double bind. When Black and brown homes are appraised, they're often undervalued, okay? And a lot of you probably heard the New York Times story about the professor from Baltimore, John Hopkins, who tried to sell his house, and then he got a low amount, and he then replaced all his pictures with pictures of his white colleague. And then the house went up by like $650,000 in the appraisal. You remember that story? And now it's just not one story. Appraisal bias, HUD is now, has a whole department about it. So that's one thing. When Black and brown homes are going to be valued, they're undervalued. But when it's for property tax purposes, they're overvalued. And that's what we call the double bind. And so how is it that they're overvalued? Because property taxes aren't done with appraisals. They're done with something called mass appraisals. So it's not the value of your individual home. It's the value of an area, right? You take it in an area and then they take the average and then make adjustments. So that's how this is happening, is because of these kinds of mass appraisals. And But that's what we call the double bind. When homes are being appraised, again, they are undervalued, but when they're being appraised for property tax purposes, right, they are overvalued. So, let me just close and say what we're then doing about it is the universe to what this partnership, we provide property tax appeal services to low-income homeowners or homeowners with lower valued homes, because we know Milwaukee actually is doing, you all are doing quite well on this issue of the property tax assessments. I mean, quite well compared to other places, but you all still have a problem with the lowest valued homes being overtaxed. And so what we're doing is doing appeals for free, because a lot of times the people who are living in these overvalued homes, they don't know that the appeal process even exists. So if you're overtaxing them, they're just gonna have to live with it. So the part of the project is providing appeal services for these homeowners for free, number one. And then number two, for homeowners who are already in property tax trouble, right? Finding, going to court with them and finding a way out of that property tax trouble. So that's the whole project, again, between University of Wisconsin and community advocates, is we're really entering this space because, lots of housing organizations are doing a lot of great work about mortgage foreclosure. But it was before this, there was no housing organization in Milwaukee doing work on property tax foreclosure in this way. And it's an area that has gone unnoticed, and hopefully with our work that we're doing, it will, we'll start bringing attention and get some justice.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that project. And listen, my book is going to be a long book. It's not going to be a short book, but it's just got a little bit longer because I have to include that in one of the chapters. So I can't wait to look at the data. I'll be calling, emailing something about looking at that data because I think it's so important. I'm trying to uncover the stuff that people don't know about. This is how I explain the work I do. How many of you guys do big puzzles, like 1,000-piece puzzles? Raise your hand, right? What do you do when you get a 1,000-piece puzzle? You clear off a table, right? You dump all the pieces on the puzzle on the table, and you start, putting the puzzle together. Some people start on the outside, some people start on the inside. But what happens if somebody comes and takes the cover of the box away from you? How do you finish that puzzle? It's going to be practically impossible, or it's going to take you way longer, right? That's what's happened to all of us in Milwaukee. Somebody took the cover of the box away. We don't know how Milwaukee got to be what it is, particularly how the Black community got to be what it is. We don't know how the white community got to be what it is either. I'm trying to paint that cover of that box back for you. That's the purpose of my book.
It's a powerful image. So I love that.
Yeah, it won't be a short book. People are like, Reggie, how long is the book going to be?
Honey,
like,
just added one chapter, evidently.
Yeah, can I? Yeah, right. Can I finish first, and then I'll tell you how long it is? It's not going to be War and Peace, that's for sure, but it's not going to be a short read. It's not going to be like Cliff Notes version of it. Anybody that knows me know I'm very detail oriented, and I put a lot of time and effort into writing this book. I want it to be a book that's interesting, but also very informative. I want people to understand how we got to where we are. As my role as a griot at American Black Holocaust Museum, one of the things Dr. Cameron taught me is that, listen, people don't know history very well, and when you learn it, you have to share it with people. So that's what I've been doing for the last 20 plus years, is sharing everything that I learned. My wife can tell you that family members of mine will tell you when I was a kid, and y'all not gonna believe this, when I was a kid, I never talked. People thought something was wrong with me because I didn't talk. And I don't know why. I don't know if I was shy or just didn't have anything to say. But I tell people, I joke that, well, I think I was saving it up for when I became an adult. Now I can't stop talking. I can't shut up. I have like diarrhea in the mouth, right? And part of it is because when I learn stuff, I want to share it with people. I don't want to learn stuff and just have it stuck in my brain. I want to share it with people. So that's what I do. I talk to people. My wife and daughter always tease me like, Reggie, we can't go anywhere without you knowing somebody. I'm like, that's because I talk to people. I like to talk to people. I like to meet people. I like to hear people's stories. I like to share stories with them because that's the essence of who I am as a griot, is that I've learned about my community. And as a griot, my responsibility is to share this history with my community.
And, I couldn't agree with you more. Being from West Africa, the understanding, listen to me, stories are what's going to change the world, right? Stories. If I told you all the facts in my book just with statistics, that's one thing a mistake we make as professors, for any of the other professors in the room. We throw statistics at people, we throw facts at people. We've got to stop that. If you actually want to make change, it's about telling it a story. People need to emotionally connect with what's going on, right? And so it's okay to do statistics, but it's got to be woven within a narrative. And that's how we actually reach the hearts and the minds and produce change. And so that's actually what I'm trying to do in Plundered, is again, move from my normal law professor of my law review articles giving you facts, and then to, again, not tell you, but show you through an actual story all of the things that I'm talking about. And that's how people can, again, actually connect. And that's how we're going to, again, change hearts and minds, which is the work.
Absolutely. I've been recruiting people to be a part of my book. And the first chapter of the book is called Suburban Stories. I want to hear about life in suburbia in Metro Milwaukee. I don't care if you're black, white, whatever. I want to hear what your opinions are about your life in suburbia, because I want to undo some of the myths about suburban Milwaukee. Everybody thinks in the suburbs, oh, it's so safe. Nothing bad ever happens in the suburbs. Every time there's something that happens bad in the suburbs, I guarantee you somebody's going to say on the news, stuff like this never happens around here. Liars! Stop lying and saying that. I'm tired of white people lying. This stuff like this never happens in our community. I was about to curse again because it really makes me mad when I hear that. Stop lying. I want to hear those stories. I know there's one person here, Kathy, that's already agreed.
He's going to be over here faint. I'm going to faint if he keeps up with this.
Yeah, so anybody here that has a story they want to share with me, please come and talk to me after we're done, and I'll be happy to interview you and include your stories in the book. Because I think, just as the professor said, stories are what matters. As a griot, I tell stories. I know all kinds of data, statistics stuff. This stuff sticks in my brain, and that's just the way my brain is wired. And, my wife is always telling me, you can remember what happened in 1957 in Milwaukee, but you can remember what happened last night in our house. That's the way my brain is wired.
She said he didn't remember to do the dishes.
So please,
if you didn't see her face, she was like,
Anybody who has a story, I want to share your story. I want the book to be full of stories. I don't want to just share a bunch of data and statistics because it'll bore the heck out of you.
Yes. Yeah, we are 10 minutes over time. So I just want to say a big thank you to Reggie for joining and making this conversation so much fun. I just enjoyed myself. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for coming. We're going to have, thank you to Boswell. Thank you to community advocates. Just thank you.